The afternoon sun streamed through the glass doors of Titan Enterprises, casting long shadows across the sleek lobby. Employees bustled about, phones ringing, computers humming, but all of that noise seemed to fade the moment he walked in. A man in jeans and a worn leather jacket, calm and collected, with a face that carried both quiet authority and silent warning. That man was Chuck Norris. The receptionist, new and nervous on her first week, didn't notice the subtle aura at first. She only saw a man approaching the desk. She straightened, adjusted her blazer, and said firmly, "Sir, you're not authorized to be here. Please leave immediately." Chuck raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor unshaken. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply placed a single briefcase on the counter and looked at her with piercing eyes that seemed to see through the confusion and arrogance in the room. "I just need to speak with the manager," he said, his voice steady, controlled. Her finger trembled as she pointed toward the manager's office. "You can't come in here. The manager doesn't meet with random visitors. Please, leave." A few employees had begun to glance over. Whispers floated across the lobby, but most were too focused on their work to notice. Meanwhile, the security guard, a burly man used to handling minor disturbances, stepped forward, ready to escort this stranger out. Chuck didn't move. He simply opened the briefcase ever so slightly, enough to hint at the documents inside, but not revealing everything. The manager's office door opened, and Manager Davis strutted out, confident and arrogant, thinking he was about to assert his authority. "Who are you? You can't just..." But the words caught in his throat when his eyes met Chuck's. Calm, unshakable, unyielding. A presence so commanding it made him falter, even for a moment. "I said leave," Davis barked, his ego making his voice louder than necessary. Chuck's lips barely curved into a smile. No threats, no shouting, just a quiet energy that radiated power. People stopped walking, stopped talking, frozen in curiosity and tension. They didn't know it yet, but the man they were about to humiliate was no ordinary visitor. "Sometimes," Chuck said quietly, almost to himself, "arrogance blinds the eyes that should see." Manager Davis smirked, dismissing the comment, thinking it was just another line from a stranger. But his smirk would not last long. Not when the full truth of Chuck's presence came crashing down, shattering egos and leaving a lesson in respect louder than any lecture could. And with that, the stage was set for one of the most unforgettable encounters in Titan Enterprises history. The moment when arrogance met true power, and everyone inside the lobby would witness something they would never forget. It was a hectic afternoon at Titan Enterprises. The air smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, the sound of keyboards clicking and phones ringing creating the usual office rhythm. Employees darted between cubicles, carrying files, answering calls, and exchanging hurried greetings. Among them, Manager Davis moved with a swagger that drew attention, not for respect, but because of the fear he commanded. His gold watch glinted under the fluorescent lights, a symbol of authority, or so he believed. Davis had perfected the art of intimidation. He barked at staff over minor mistakes, dismissed questions as foolish, and carried an air of superiority that left no room for challenge. Employees had learned to keep their heads down, obey quickly, and never ever question him. Today, however, the universe was about to test his confidence, and it had chosen the perfect messenger. The lobby doors opened with a quiet but deliberate push. A man stepped in. Jeans. Worn leather jacket. Calm, almost unassuming posture. No entourage, no flashy car, no display of wealth. Just a single briefcase in his hand and eyes that seemed to pierce through the facade of arrogance. Chuck Norris. The receptionist, already on edge, immediately rose to her full height, trying to project authority that she didn't feel. "Sir, this area is restricted. You can't be here. Please leave immediately." Chuck didn't move, didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply placed his briefcase gently on the counter and looked at her, a steady gaze that seemed to weigh her very thoughts. "I need to speak with the manager," he said calmly. Her finger wavered, and for the first time, she hesitated. Some of the staff had begun to notice the tension in the air. Whispers traveled down cubicles like a silent ripple. Phones were pulled out, cameras ready, even though most didn't fully understand what was about to unfold. Manager Davis emerged from his office, strutting like a king, full of confidence and cocky superiority. "Who are you? You can't just walk in here. But as his eyes met Chuck's, his words faltered. There was something in that calm, commanding presence, something that made the usual authority of Davis feel flimsy. A subtle unease crept into his voice. "Leave immediately," Davis barked, raising his hand to signal security. Chuck didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened his briefcase slightly, just enough to hint at the documents inside, but not revealing everything. The hint was enough to make Davis pause, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. The employees had stopped in their tracks. Whispers spread through the lobby like wildfire. Some began recording, sensing something extraordinary was happening. Chuck's calm voice broke the tension, though only a few heard it. "Sometimes arrogance blinds the eyes that should see." Davis smirked, believing it to be a meaningless quip. But the expression on his face was a lie. His confidence had begun to crack. Every step Chuck took toward the counter was deliberate, measured, and silent, like a storm approaching, invisible yet inevitable. Meanwhile, employees who had interacted with Davis before began to exchange glances. Some remembered his harsh words, his condescending smirks. They couldn't explain why, but the feeling of unease in the room was palpable. The man standing in front of them wasn't just a visitor. He was someone who commanded respect without demanding it. Chuck placed his briefcase firmly on the counter and nodded once, silently. In that moment, everyone in the lobby felt it. This was no ordinary confrontation. Something monumental was about to happen, and the arrogant manager at the center of it was completely unprepared. Before we move on, tell me in the comments, have you ever faced someone who made you rethink your arrogance? The lobby of Titan Enterprises had grown eerily silent. Phones were raised, whispers hushed, and even the air seemed to hold its breath. Chuck Norris stood at the counter, calm, composed, and unmoved by the escalating tension around him. In his hand, he held the briefcase, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of authority that no one there could ignore. Manager Davis, on the other hand, was a storm of ego. His chest puffed out, his fingers drumming impatiently on the desk. He could feel the eyes of every employee on him, their curiosity mixed with silent amusement, but he refused to show any weakness. Arrogance was his armor, and he believed it would shield him against any challenge, even one like Chuck Norris. "Let me see your credentials," Davis barked, trying to assert control. Chuck simply opened the briefcase. Inside were documents, stock certificates, and legal papers proving ownership of Titan Enterprises. $500,000 worth of influence, all quietly resting in his briefcase. The manager's eyes widened, but his ego refused to acknowledge the reality in front of him. "Nice try," Davis sneered. "You think waving papers at me impresses me? This isn't some game. Get out before I call security." Employees exchanged uneasy glances. Some stifled laughter. Others whispered, "Is he serious?" "That's Chuck Norris." The tension was tangible, a silent war of wills stretching across the polished marble floors. Chuck's voice broke the silence, calm but firm. "Sometimes arrogance blinds the eyes that should see." The words hung in the air, echoing off the walls. Davis's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He tried to regain his composure, but the unease in his chest was undeniable. Every fiber of his being wanted to assert dominance, to belittle this man standing silently before him, but the evidence in the briefcase was undeniable, and Chuck's presence radiated an authority that no amount of shouting could match. Ignoring the threat, Chuck calmly placed a check and several documents on the counter. The numbers were astronomical, proof of ownership, wealth, and control. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He simply let the facts speak for themselves. Davis reached for the papers with a condescending laugh. "You think this means anything? I don't care who you are. You're wasting your time." Chuck's eyes met his, steady and unyielding. That calm, silent energy was enough to make even the bravest heart tremble. Every employee in the room felt it. Even the security guard, used to handling disruptions, felt a twinge of respect mixed with fear. Then, in a move that stunned everyone, Davis grabbed the documents and tossed them toward the trash bin. A lighter flicked open, and flames began consuming the papers. The acrid smell of burning ink and paper filled the air. A few employees gasped. Phones recorded the shocking scene. Davis laughed, thinking he had just asserted dominance, But the room was frozen, not in fear of him, but of what would come next. Chuck Norris didn't react. Not a flinch, not a shout, not even a movement. He stood calmly, letting the manager's arrogance fully reveal itself to everyone around. His lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Power," he said softly, "isn't in showing what you can destroy. It's in showing what you can control, and what you can inspire." Davis scoffed, trying to shake off the unease creeping into him. He turned to the staff, smirking, hoping they would rally to his side, but their eyes told a different story. They were witnessing respect being demanded not by force, but by presence. Every whispered conversation, every glance toward Chuck, chipped away at the manager's fragile ego. Then, with the calm of a man who knew he held the ultimate authority, Chuck stepped back and closed his briefcase. The fire in the trash bin reflected briefly in his eyes, but he did not speak again. Instead, he gave a subtle nod, almost imperceptible, signaling that the confrontation was not over, but the lesson had begun. Employees recorded the scene, hearts pounding. They had just seen arrogance collide with true authority, and the silence of Chuck Norris spoke louder than any shouting ever could. Davis, now visibly trembling, tried one last attempt at dominance. "You think I'm afraid of you?" Chuck Norris simply raised an eyebrow, turned, and began walking toward the exit. The deliberate, calm steps echoed through the lobby. Every employee felt the weight of the moment. Whispers turned into gasps. Phones were still recording. Everyone knew this was not the end, but the beginning of a lesson that would be remembered for years to come. For the first time in his life, Manager Davis realized, his arrogance, his loud threats, his condescending attitude, all of it was meaningless in the presence of someone who commanded respect without raising a hand. The lobby of Titan Enterprises was dead silent, though a storm of whispers and nervous glances brewed just beneath the surface. Chuck Norris had walked calmly toward the exit, his briefcase closed, his expression unreadable. Every step he took seemed deliberate, measured, and in complete control. It was the kind of calm that made people instinctively stand a little straighter, breathe a little slower, and think twice before speaking. Manager Davis remained frozen, his hand still hovering over the desk where the check and documents had smoldered in the trash bin. His ego, once towering and unshakable, was crumbling. For the first time in years, he felt small, insignificant, and utterly powerless. Every employee in the lobby could see it. Every eye was on him, yet no one dared speak. A few of the more observant staff members, those who had known Davis long enough to recognize the cracks in his armor, whispered among themselves. "Wait, wasn't that Chuck Norris?" "Yeah, it's him. That's really him." Phones were out, cameras recording. Some employees had already live-streamed snippets to social media. Clips of the confrontation were spreading faster than anyone could imagine, capturing the exact moment arrogance met silent power. The receptionist, still pale from the initial confrontation, shakily asked, He just walked out." A junior clerk, barely able to contain his disbelief, murmured, "And we just watched the manager burn a $500,000 check? That's insane." Davis, trying to regain control, straightened his jacket and attempted to bark orders. "Everyone back to work. Nothing to see here." But his voice sounded hollow. Empty. The employees' attention had already shifted. Whispers of awe and speculation filled the air. People glanced at one another, trying to process what they had witnessed. Chuck Norris had entered quietly, had been dismissed, had remained calm in the face of ego and threats, and now he had left without a single word. Yet his presence dominated the room. Then something unexpected happened. One of the older employees, who had been quietly observing from the corner, leaned over to a coworker. "I've seen that face somewhere. I've seen him before." Realization began to ripple through the staff like electricity. They started connecting the dots, the aura, the confidence, the subtle control of every space he entered. They all remembered hearing about the man who could command respect without raising a hand, a legend whose name alone inspired awe. The receptionist's hands shook as she whispered to the junior clerk, "You're telling me he's—" Before the question could be finished, the sound of a sleek black car pulling up outside reached the lobby through the glass doors. Heads turned. The receptionist pressed her fingers to her lips in shock. Within moments, 3 executives, briefcases in hand, burst through the doors. Their expressions were tense, urgent, yet respectful. One of them called out, "Mr. Norris, we've been waiting for you, sir." Davis's face went pale. His eyes darted from the executives to the lobby doors, then back to the trail Chuck had left. He stammered, "Wait, Chuck Norris. That's him." Another employee, her mouth wide open, whispered, "The owner? He's the owner?" "Yes." Every piece of evidence was undeniable. The man they had dismissed, the man they had mocked, the man they had tried to force out of the building. He owned the company. And not just in name. Every decision, every policy, every corner of Titan Enterprises was ultimately under his authority. The realization hit the staff like a wave. The receptionist, who had first ordered him to leave, felt a knot of fear and awe twist in her stomach. The junior clerk shook his head, muttering, "I can't believe we just watched that, and didn't even know it." Even the security guard, a man used to handling difficult situations, lowered his head slightly, a rare look of respect crossing his features. The aura of Chuck Norris was undeniable, commanding yet calm, powerful yet silent. Manager Davis, for the first time in his life, was speechless. His arrogance had crumbled entirely, replaced by a gnawing fear and the recognition that his authority had been nothing more than illusion. His staff, his subordinates, all saw it now. True power was quiet, deliberate, and came not from threats or bluster, but from presence, respect, and competence. Chuck Norris hadn't shouted. He hadn't forced anyone to obey. Yet, in leaving, he had demonstrated that true authority doesn't demand recognition, it earns it. Employees whispered, glanced at one another, and shook their heads in disbelief. Some recorded everything, knowing this encounter would be talked about for years. And in that charged, tense, silent lobby, one thing became perfectly clear: the rules had changed. Chuck Norris wasn't just a visitor. He was the man in control. And everyone there, even the arrogant manager, would never forget the lesson he had just taught, silently, deliberately, and perfectly. The black car had barely come to a stop outside Titan Enterprises when the doors swung open, and a team of executives hurried inside. Their steps were purposeful, confident, and urgent. They carried folders, legal documents, and digital tablets, all prepared to finalize details that only the true owner of the company could authorize. In the lobby, the employees were frozen. Some still held their phones, recording the chaos. Others simply stared in disbelief. Whispers ran through the room like wildfire. "That's him. That's really him. The man who just got thrown out owns the company? No way. This can't be real." Manager Davis, pale and trembling, finally found his voice, though it came out as a stammer. "Wait, Chuck Norris. That's him." One of the executives stepped forward and addressed Chuck directly. "Sir, we've been waiting for you. We've finalized the documents, signed the contracts. All departments are ready for your review." Davis's jaw dropped. His usual arrogance evaporated instantly, replaced by a mix of fear, confusion, and disbelief. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The arrogance that had filled the lobby only minutes ago was gone, leaving behind the stark reality. He had humiliated the very person he was meant to respect. Chuck Norris looked around the room, his calm gaze sweeping over employees, staff, and the stunned manager alike. There was no anger in his eyes, only quiet authority. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to threaten. His presence alone demanded recognition, and now, finally, everyone understood exactly why. "I came here to make a simple deposit," Chuck said calmly, opening his briefcase one last time. "But after witnessing what just happened, I realize there's more to do." He paused, letting the words sink in. Employees held their breath. Davis's face had turned a shade of red that spoke volumes. Humiliation, regret, and fear mingled in every line of his expression. "Sometimes," Chuck continued, "people are blinded by arrogance. They fail to see the truth, fail to recognize what is right in front of them. And sometimes, that arrogance costs them their chance to learn." Davis's hands trembled as he stepped forward, almost instinctively, trying to salvage his dignity. "Sir, I didn't know. Chuck raised a hand, stopping him without a word. The room fell silent again. Everyone could feel the weight of the moment. The man who had been dismissed, mocked, and belittled had just revealed himself as the one with ultimate authority, the one who controlled the future of every employee in the building. "That's exactly the problem," Chuck said, his tone firm but not cruel. "Respect isn't about fear. Respect isn't about status or titles. It's about how you treat others when you think no one is watching." He turned his attention to the employees who had stayed calm and respectful throughout the ordeal, nodding at them subtly. They understood the unspoken message. Humility and composure were recognized, rewarded, and valued far above arrogance. Davis sank to his knees, shaking, unable to meet Chuck's gaze. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know who you were. I never meant to." Chuck Norris's gaze softened slightly, a faint nod acknowledging both the apology and the lesson learned. Then, as if the entire moment had been a test, he addressed the room once more. "From today onward, behavior like arrogance and disrespect will not be tolerated. Those who show humility, integrity, and composure, those are the people who will thrive." He gestured toward a young clerk who had remained polite and professional throughout the ordeal. "You," Chuck said, "have shown the respect and composure this company values. Effective immediately, you will assume greater responsibility in managing the lobby and staff. Let this serve as a reminder that character matters more than ego." The executives nodded, filing in behind him, ready to implement the changes he had just outlined. Davis, meanwhile, remained on the floor, humbled, trembling, and finally understanding the true meaning of authority. The man he had mocked wasn't just any visitor. He was the one who held the keys to the entire enterprise. Employees whispered to one another, some still recording, others simply in awe. They had witnessed a rare spectacle, a clash of arrogance versus quiet power, and the result had been undeniable. The person they underestimated had turned the situation completely around. Not with anger, not with force, but with presence, calmness, and authority. As Chuck Norris walked toward the exit, briefcase in hand, the employees of Titan Enterprises realized the lesson they would never forget. True power is silent. True respect is earned, not demanded. What would you do if you were in Davis's shoes? Comment below. Fire or forgive? Drop your answer. Let's see who has the biggest heart and the clearest mind. The lobby of Titan Enterprises was still buzzing with whispers and stunned expressions, but the tension had shifted. Where once arrogance and fear ruled, now there was awe, respect, and the silent recognition of true authority. Chuck Norris stood near the exit, briefcase in hand, his posture calm and unyielding. The executives flanked him, ready to implement the changes he had quietly dictated moments before. Manager Davis remained on the floor, kneeling, his face pale, his hands trembling. The reality of his actions, the humiliation, the arrogance, the disrespect, sank deep into his conscience. 4 years, he had ruled with ego, believing that fear equaled authority. Now, for the first time, he understood how wrong he had been. He had mocked the very person who held ultimate power over the company, and more importantly, he had ignored the simple truth: respect must be earned, not demanded. "Sir, I'm so sorry," Davis stammered, barely able to speak. "I didn't know. I never realized who you were. Please. I'm ready to. I'll do whatever it takes." Chuck Norris looked down at him, calm, steady, unwavering. There was no anger, no rage, only a measured understanding of human error and the lessons it could teach. His voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. "That's exactly the problem," Chuck said. "You acted without understanding, without respect. But that doesn't have to define you. What matters is what you do now." Davis swallowed hard, relief and fear mixing in his chest. He nodded repeatedly, finally realizing that humility, not fear, would be his path forward. He had been given a second chance, one he could not squander. Chuck turned his attention to the rest of the staff, his gaze sweeping across every face, lingering for a moment on each person who had remained professional and respectful. There were only a few, and they now stood out, not because of wealth or position, but because of their integrity. "From this moment forward," Chuck said, his voice calm but firm, "the values of respect, composure, and humility will guide this company. Those who lead through arrogance will no longer have that privilege. Those who act with integrity, even when ignored or belittled, will be recognized." He paused, looking directly at the young clerk who had quietly observed everything. The clerk's hands were folded, head slightly bowed, but there was a quiet pride in his eyes. You have shown the respect and patience that this company needs. Effective immediately, you will assume a leadership role in this branch. Let this be a lesson for everyone. True authority is earned by character, not by intimidation or title." The executives nodded, ready to execute the changes Chuck had outlined. Policies were being updated. Promotions were being finalized. Responsibilities were being reassigned. Even Manager Davis would remain in the company, but under strict mentorship, ensuring he learned the lesson humility demanded. The employees whispered among themselves, amazed at the shift in power dynamics. The air was electric with awe. Some continued recording, but many simply watched, silently understanding the gravity of what they had witnessed. Chuck Norris had not just revealed ownership, he had revealed the truth about respect and leadership. Davis finally got to his feet, shaking, but more composed than before. He met Chuck's gaze with genuine remorse. "Sir, I understand now. I will do better. I promise. Thank you for showing me the right way." Chuck gave a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement that words alone were not enough, but action, humility, and patience could repair even the deepest errors. Without another word, Chuck walked toward the exit. The employees parted instinctively, giving him room as if they were witnessing not just a leader, but a force of nature. Outside, the black car waited. Chuck slid inside, the door closing with quiet finality. He left the lobby exactly as he had entered, calm, composed, and commanding without having shouted once. Inside, the lobby remained in stunned silence. But the atmosphere had changed entirely. Where fear once ruled, respect now prevailed. Where arrogance had dominated, humility had been rewarded. Everyone knew they had witnessed a lesson that would echo in Titan Enterprises for years to come. Chuck Norris had taught more than just a lesson to the manager. He had taught the entire company the true meaning of authority, respect, and humility. He had shown that power was not about intimidation, wealth, or fear. It was about integrity, presence, and the quiet ability to lead by example. Employees began to nod to one another, whispering encouragement and quiet admiration for those who had remained composed. Manager Davis, humbled and thoughtful, finally understood the weight of his mistakes. And the young clerk, now elevated to leadership, realized that respect, patience, and humility were more powerful than any title or position could ever be. The lobby had returned to its normal rhythm, but it was forever changed. The memory of Chuck Norris' calm authority, his silent dominance, and the humbling of arrogance would remain ingrained in everyone present. It was a moment that would be told again and again, a story of arrogance, humility, and the quiet power of respect. The lobby of Titan Enterprises had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but it was not the same as before. The faint hum of printers, the click of keyboards, and the murmur of voices carried a new weight, a new awareness. Something profound had happened here, a lesson that would echo long after Chuck Norris had left the building. Employees gathered in small groups, whispering quietly about the events they had just witnessed. Some replayed videos on their phones, unable to believe what had transpired. Others simply sat back, letting the memories settle into their minds like a heavy, instructive silence. The arrogance and chaos that had ruled the lobby for years had been replaced by respect, awareness, and the quiet recognition that true power lies in integrity, humility, and composure. Manager Davis, once the embodiment of pride and authority, now sat quietly at his desk, staring at the floor. He had lived his career thinking that fear, intimidation, and loud displays of power equated to leadership. Now, he understood the hard truth. Those traits could only carry you so far. Beyond that, they blinded you to the reality around you. He had mocked a man, dismissed him, and even destroyed evidence of his ownership. Yet Chuck Norris had handled the entire situation without shouting, threatening, or losing his composure. The young clerk, newly promoted for his patience and humility, walked past Davis and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You'll have a chance to learn from this," the clerk said softly. "It's not too late to show respect and integrity going forward." Davis nodded, a mixture of relief and shame washing over him. He knew that the real lesson wasn't just about his own humiliation, it was about how respect and humility shape an entire workplace. True leadership wasn't in loud commands or gold watches, but in patience, quiet authority, and the ability to inspire respect rather than demand it. Meanwhile, employees who had watched the confrontation unfold in person or on their phones began reflecting on their own actions. Some had laughed at the manager's antics in the past. Others had joined in subtle acts of disrespect, thinking it harmless or funny. Now, they saw the consequences. How quickly arrogance could crumble in the presence of someone who carried true authority. They realized that respect is never optional. It is earned, practiced, and demonstrated consistently. The executives who had arrived with Chuck began quietly reorganizing the structure of the branch, ensuring that integrity and respect would guide decision-making moving forward. Policies were being rewritten, responsibilities reassigned, and recognition systems put in place to reward humility and composure. Employees who had demonstrated patience were being empowered. Those who had relied on arrogance or shortcuts were given a choice: learn or face consequences. Outside, Chuck Norris' black car pulled away, leaving the parking lot quiet once more. But the impact of his visit lingered. It wasn't just about revealing ownership. It wasn't about promotions or punishments. It was about teaching an entire company the value of respect, humility, and true leadership. Every employee present would carry that lesson forward in every interaction, every decision, and every challenge they faced. For Manager Davis, it was a humbling turning point. For the young clerk, it was a defining moment of recognition and responsibility. For the rest of the employees, it was a story they would tell for years, about the day arrogance collided with quiet power and the lesson that true authority does not shout, it inspires. Respect, they realized, is not about titles, wealth, or appearances. It is about how you treat others when no one is watching. It is about consistency, integrity, and recognizing the value of every person, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Chuck Norris had shown that true strength lies in restraint, composure, and silent leadership. And so, Titan Enterprises moved forward, forever changed. The hum of the lobby continued, but now it carried a deeper meaning. Employees acted with a new awareness. Manager Davis had been humbled, learning the most difficult lesson of his career. The young clerk had been elevated, ready to lead with integrity. And the memory of Chuck Norris' visit became a symbol, a story, and a standard for behavior that would resonate in the company for years to come. Oh, you believe true strength comes from humility and respect? Comment below, respect or arrogance?